This girl's name is Mona. She moved to Tokyo a year ago. Throughout her life, Mona has never had a boy who could resist her charm. However, there is a strange boy who is an exception. So Mona is determined to win his heart. From the moment she was born, Mona had a cute face. Later, when Mona began to grow up, she developed a very striking appearance. Because of that, Mona has many friends around her. They really enjoy interacting with her. Even just Mona smiling can make everyone around her freeze. Because of Mona's innocence itself. Therefore, she got used to being the center of attention. After some time, Mona is now a high school student. Her prominence still remains. Whenever Mona goes out, all eyes turn toward her. And Mona is very friendly to everyone. That makes people like her even more. However, there is one person who always seems shy in front of Mona. That boy's name is Kuroiwa. Unlike the people around her, Kuroiwa always looks at Mona with an annoyed gaze. Even Mona doesn't know the reason why Kuroiwa always treats her that way. It turns out Kuroiwa hasn't moved here long ago, so he hasn't gotten used to this new environment yet. At this time, the other boys in the class are extremely jealous because Kuroiwa always has the chance to be close to Mona. But Kuroiwa himself doesn't want this to continue. This makes him feel uncomfortable. So Mona angrily returns to her seat. This is the first time she has experienced this feeling. Because Kuroiwa doesn't pay any attention to her, it hurts her pride. A little while later, Mona carefully observes Kuroiwa. Suddenly, she discovers that Kuroiwa really likes cats. So Mona immediately uses this to start a conversation with him. At this moment, Mona acts in cute ways like a cat to attract Kuroiwa's attention. However, this time Mona fails again, making her frustrated. Even the other boys feel upset along with Mona. Kuroiwa bluntly refuses the chance to talk to her, leaving Mona stunned. Because all this time, other boys would always take the initiative. Mona's life has always been surrounded by attention and admiration. But for Kuroiwa, this is a completely different case. So Mona thought of many other ways, mainly to attract Kuroiwa's attention. But Mona kept feeling disappointed, because Kuroiwa didn't even glance at her. However, Mona didn't stop there. She had to use her final move. Later, when it was time for class, while the teacher was lecturing, Mona felt a little unwell, and she wanted Kuroiwa to take her to the nurse's office. That was only Mona's initial purpose. After they arrived, Mona suddenly pressed Kuroiwa against the wall. She seemed to have executed her plan correctly. But Mona felt a little empty inside, because this was the first time she acted like that. Kuroiwa was the one who made Mona go to such lengths. While he was becoming flustered, Mona took this opportunity to ask about Kuroiwa's feelings toward her. Since Kuroiwa was also acting cold in front of Mona, she was worried, afraid that she had done something wrong, causing Kuroiwa to dislike her so much. Suddenly, he immediately denied it. At that very moment, Mona realized that Kuroiwa had fallen for the trap. At this point, she could no longer retreat. Suddenly, the two of them encountered a small accident. It caused them to accidentally end up lying on the same bed. It seemed this had crossed Mona's limits. So at this moment, she became extremely flustered. However, Kuroiwa, after everything that had just happened, still maintained his usual expression. Mona truly could not have expected that one day she would lose her appeal so completely. After that, Mona reached a desperate point. She had no choice but to open her top. This caused Kuroiwa to become bewildered. However, he did not seem in the least pleased by this. So Mona truly felt helpless at that moment. Yet, everything had gone too far. Mona could no longer salvage the situation. Afterwards, Kuroiwa, in order to avoid trouble, immediately left the room, leaving Mona alone there. Suddenly, Kuroiwa spoke to Mona, saying that she should reserve such things for the people she actually liked. From that remark of Kuroiwa, Mona truly felt there was nothing left for her to be ashamed of. And her heart suddenly started beating unusually fast. Afterwards, Mona returned to the classroom. As soon as she arrived, the boys asked her how she was doing. Kuroiwa, however, didn't say a word. He just kept staring intently at Mona. Surprisingly, this made her extremely flustered. Mona's heart was now racing uncontrollably. She suddenly felt something very strange. It seemed that Mona had already developed feelings for Kuroiwa. And at that very moment, Mona resolved with all her determination that she would definitely win Kuroiwa's heart. The next day, Mona happily went to school. Suddenly, she happened to meet Kuroiwa and greeted him. But Kuroiwa still appeared cold. He gave Mona a disdainful look and then walked away. Afterwards, the class moved on to physical education. At this point, although Mona had just started warming up, She was already enough to make the other boys swoon. However, Mona only did this so that Kuroiwa could watch her. But he didn't even glance at her. So at present, Mona no longer knew any way to make Kuroiwa notice her. Afterwards, Mona ran over to Kuroiwa's place. She just wanted to get a closer look at the boy who had dared to ignore her charm. But when the two were in such close proximity, Kuroiwa also became frightened. Afterwards, Mona had an accident where water splashed onto her clothes, causing an embarrassing situation for both of them. This was an unexpected move by Mona. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa acted very gallantly. He used his own shirt to shield Mona. Because of that, Mona blushed, but she did not forget to thank Kuroiwa. Suddenly, a girl named Toma noticed what had happened between the two of them just now. As for Kuroiwa, he went home with his new friends, who were Kido and Kobayakawa. At this time, Kobayakawa was curious about Kuroiwa, wondering why he kept such a distance from Mona. It turned out that Kuroiwa was going to be the heir of a shrine, and he was forbidden from getting close to girls. Because of this reason, Kuroiwa had never had a girlfriend before. But here, Kuroiwa witnessed many embarrassing scenes. He even blushed when thinking about them. Afterwards, Kuroiwa regained his composure. He had come to this place to train his mind. Kuroiwa resolved to live a life free from temptation. The next morning, Mona returned the shirt from the previous day to Kuroiwa. She even leaned close to his ear to express her thanks, making Kuroiwa unable to handle it. The next day in class, everyone was in the art room for a drawing lesson. Mona was acting as the model for everyone to draw. Her cuteness amazed everyone. Kuroiwa, however, turned in the opposite direction. He deliberately avoided Mona, which immediately made her angry. Because Kuroiwa was the first person to act in ways that Mona had never experienced before. Afterwards, she took the initiative to approach Kuroiwa. But because of Mona's cuteness, Kuroiwa continued to blush uncontrollably. He hadn't expected Mona to be this cute again today. It turned out this was normal. Even the classmates around them felt the same way. Luckily, Kuroiwa eventually regained his composure. He focused on completing his drawing. Mona, on the other hand, was surprised by Kuroiwa's calm expression. Suddenly, she noticed that Haruno kept sneaking glances at her. Meanwhile, Kuroiwa was concentrating on Mona's neck, making her feel flustered to the point that Mona had no choice but to run outside. Then she went to the bathroom to regain her composure, because Mona was not used to being stared at by Kuroiwa like that. On Kuroiwa's side, after he finished the drawing, Kuroiwa's friends started teasing him. They wondered what he would do with the drawing, but it seemed that Kuroiwa became embarrassed by this awkward situation. A little later, when it was break time, by coincidence, Kuroiwa ran into Mona at the library. At that moment, their hands accidentally touched. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa quickly walked away, leaving Mona alone there. After a while, the boys around started feeling jealous when they saw Mona go to Kuroiwa's spot to sit. But on Kuroiwa's side, he wasn't comfortable either. He kept trying to remain calm. Suddenly, Mona saw Haruno constantly peeking. But when she connected all the events, Mona was shocked to find out that the person Haruno was peeking at was actually Kuroiwa. Perhaps she had secretly liked Kuroiwa, which made Mona unable to believe this truth. She gradually became anxious. Mona thought that she would not have much time left. However, Kuroiwa didn't care about her at all. At this moment, Mona was determined to put all her effort into this matter. Then she put on glasses along with a book. Mona's goal at this time was to attract Kuroiwa. Just as she planned, Kuroiwa became flustered because of Mona's beautiful appearance at that moment. At one point, Mona even touched Kuroiwa's leg, making him embarrassed by the sensation. Unable to handle this, Kuroiwa had no choice but to move to another spot, leaving Mona alone and angry because her plan had failed once again. Afterwards, Mona decided to follow Haruno, since she was currently Mona's rival. However, Mona couldn't gather any useful information, but it seemed that Haruno was a diligent person. Moreover, she was also humble. As a result, Mona was now worried. She feared that Kuroiwa might fall for Haruno. Suddenly, Kobayakawa came over to give Mona the book that they had been searching for earlier. At this moment, Mona thanked him, even expressing her affection toward Kobayakawa. However, Mona suddenly remembered that she had never said such things to Kuroiwa. So afterwards, Mona went up to the rooftop. It turned out that Kuroiwa was also there. But Mona hesitated and couldn't say anything, because she was completely unable to do such a thing. Mona quickly left afterwards. Meanwhile, Kuroiwa was left there, bewildered, alone. Sometime later, it had been a month since Kuroiwa moved here, but he showed no sign of noticing Mona, which made her extremely frustrated. And now Mona had another formidable rival, Haruno. Unexpectedly, the two of them got a chance to study together. Although Mona had no interest in this, Haruno was very happy about it. At this moment, Mona became even more wary of her, since they were still rivals. Suddenly, Haruno's phone received a notification, but she panicked and held it close to herself, since Haruno had something she wanted to hide. But because of this, Mona became extremely curious. She chased after Haruno to find out the secret on the phone. Unexpectedly, it was full of photos of Mona. It turned out that Haruno admired Mona very much, because she was extremely cute. What Mona had thought was just a misunderstanding. Afterwards, she hugged Haruno to express her gratitude, because of her fondness for Mona. Days later, everyone at school was preparing for the festival. As for Mona, she felt embarrassed facing Haruno. Because of the incident from the other day, Haruno had misunderstood that Mona secretly liked Kuroiwa. So Haruno encouraged her. At this moment, Mona stared intently at Kuroiwa. Even he could sense it. Afterwards, Mona and Haruno went together to the fitting room. It turned out they were preparing outfits for the upcoming festival. A little later, Haruno happened to introduce Mona to the love bridge. If you hold hands with the one you like there, the two will be forever connected in love. Although it had nothing to do with Haruno, she became excited whenever she thought about it. Afterwards, Haruno prayed, hoping that Mona and Kuroiwa would hold hands there. Suddenly, a strange girl entered the room. It turned out she needed to find Haruno for some matter. Meanwhile, Mona was alone in the room, so she wanted to try on many outfits, mainly to make Kuroiwa fall for her, with the beauty that Mona was about to prepare. Suddenly, Kuroiwa stepped into the room. Meanwhile, Mona was trying on a revealing outfit, which made both of them flustered at that very moment. Mona felt extremely embarrassed because of this. Suddenly, someone else entered, so they had no choice but to quickly hide in the wardrobe. At that moment, they had many close and intimate touches beyond what was appropriate. Kuroiwa even became short of breath, trapped in this awkward situation. Luckily, the others left, so both of them quickly came out. At this point, Mona thought she had gone too far. Suddenly, Kuroiwa complimented her. Afterwards, Kuroiwa immediately left, flustered, leaving Mona stunned and alone. Unexpectedly, this made her heart flutter. On Kuroiwa's side, he became embarrassed after just complimenting Mona as cute. Kuroiwa's heart felt like it was about to explode. The next morning, Mona took the initiative to greet Kuroiwa, thinking that after yesterday's incident, they would have a chance to become closer. However, Kuroiwa acted coldly in a frightening way. Afterwards, the day of the festival finally arrived, and everyone was busy with preparations. At this time, Mona had a break, so she tried to find a way to invite Kuroiwa along. However, he declined Mona's offer. At that moment, Mona realized that Kuroiwa didn't even look at her. Mona felt as if Kuroiwa was ignoring her even more than before. So before the festival ended, Mona wanted to settle things with Kuroiwa once and for all. Afterwards, Haruno made a plan to pair them together. So she gave a new task to both Kuroiwa and Mona. That was for them to promote the cafe together, wearing the special outfits that Haruno had prepared beforehand. However, as Kuroiwa passed by the haunted attraction, he was drawn to it. Unexpectedly, it was something Mona feared the most. But because she wanted to approach Kuroiwa, Mona had no choice but to invite him in together. As soon as they entered, Kuroiwa seemed to enjoy it, while Mona was terrified by everything around her. Afterwards, she had a very embarrassing incident, so Mona immediately ran outside. For her, that incident was truly a disaster. However, Mona still didn't give up. Afterwards, she invited Kuroiwa to go to a concert. Because Mona was too small and fragile, so she took this opportunity, hoping Kuroiwa would carry her on his shoulders. However, Mona mistook someone else for him. A little later, they participated in some other activities together. But Mona continued to fail with her initial plans. Mona felt disappointed because she couldn't get Kuroiwa's attention. Unexpectedly, the two of them accidentally went up to the love bridge. At this moment, Mona remembered what Haruno had said earlier. However, everyone around immediately noticed Mona. They were curious whether she was actually on a date. But Mona quickly cleared up the misunderstanding. It turned out that they were only there to promote the cafe. Afterwards, the couples around understood the truth. At this moment, Mona explained to Kuroiwa the meaning of the bridge where they were standing at that time. Suddenly, Mona touched Kuroiwa's hand, causing him to blush in embarrassment. Mona realized that Kuroiwa's heart was beating rapidly. And indeed it was. Kuroiwa thought that he needed to be more careful against Mona's daring actions. Afterwards, Kuroiwa intended to return to the classroom, but Mona deliberately fell to the ground, hoping to hold Kuroiwa's hand. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa used his bare hands to lift Mona up. This made her feel equally embarrassed. Mona's heart felt very strange at this moment. She couldn't describe what this feeling was. A little later, Mona returned to work. She was disappointed because her plans kept failing. At this moment, Haruno noticed Mona's expression. She guessed that things hadn't gone smoothly for Mona. So afterwards, Haruno found another opportunity for her. However, Mona was no longer feeling happy. And Kuroiwa also noticed this. But he didn't know how to deal with it either. However, the silence between them drove Mona crazy. She truly felt demoralized. Suddenly, a box fell from behind Mona. While she was fumbling to avoid it, Kuroiwa grabbed her hand to help her. Unexpectedly, in this situation, Mona also held Kuroiwa's hand. This made Kuroiwa flustered, but he was very happy, since he had never experienced something like this before. Unexpectedly, after that remark from him, Mona blushed in surprise. The next day, at school, there were many new couples after the festival. Mona thought that it was all because of the legend of the love bridge. Afterwards, Mona suddenly remembered the moments from yesterday between her and Kuroiwa on that bridge. However, Mona couldn't think too much, because she hadn't accepted the truth that she had fallen in love with Kuroiwa. Suddenly, Kuroiwa passed by with his friends. Unexpectedly, this made Mona's heart race. Afterwards, everyone went to class together. At this time, Kobayakawa wanted to hang out after school, so everyone agreed. Because of this, they had a wonderful time afterwards. And Mona also had the chance to go out with Kuroiwa. However, Kuroiwa seemed embarrassed. He truly had never experienced something like this before. As for Mona, she wasn't much better. She began to feel shy whenever facing Kuroiwa directly. But after a while, Mona gained enough courage to sit next to Kuroiwa. She even wanted to share a water bottle with him. Although Mona seemed hesitant at first, she became bolder than before. Kuroiwa, on the other hand, couldn't handle this feeling, and that made Mona very annoyed, because she was always proactive in everything. But Kuroiwa was the opposite. He always avoided Mona in every situation. Even in class, Kuroiwa wasn't friendly toward Mona at all. He always treated her poorly whenever she came near. Even Kido and Kobayakawa noticed this, so both of them became angry. They immediately arranged to talk to Kuroiwa outside. However, Kuroiwa had his own reasons for behaving that way. But Kobayakawa knew clearly that the problem lay with Kuroiwa, since Mona had always been very friendly ever since Kuroiwa transferred here. To Kido, Mona was a kind person, and according to Kuroiwa's beliefs, he should also treat others well. Therefore, Kuroiwa had no reason to continue treating Mona as he had before. Afterwards, Kuroiwa thought about this matter a lot. At this moment, Haruno happened to pass by him. So Haruno immediately became angry with Kuroiwa because of his cold attitude toward Mona. Even Haruno couldn't accept this behavior. Afterwards, as the lesson was about to begin, Mona forgot to bring her textbook. At that moment, Kuroiwa noticed the situation, so he proactively asked Mona whether she would be willing to share the book with him. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa's proactive behavior made Mona feel unusually happy. Afterwards, they pulled their desks close to each other. Because Kuroiwa just wanted to treat others well. He thought that as long as he didn't fall in love, it would be fine. From now on, Mona's mood improved considerably. Although it was raining heavily, Mona still enjoyed it on her way to school. Suddenly, she happened to run into Kuroiwa. This was indeed an opportunity for Mona, so she immediately seized it. Since it was raining, they shared the same umbrella. Taking advantage of being alone, Mona tried to test Kuroiwa's limits, so she slowly moved closer to him. It seemed that he sensed something. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa gradually moved away from the umbrella, despite Mona inching closer and closer. When they arrived at school, they happened to see a girl playing ball incredibly well. Her name was Asahi. At that moment, Mona admired Asahi's talent. Unexpectedly, a ball suddenly came toward Mona. Luckily, Kuroiwa successfully blocked the ball. Afterwards, they headed home, but before Mona left, then Asahi pulled her aside to talk. Unexpectedly, Asahi was curious about the relationship between Mona and Kuroiwa, so Mona had to explain that they were just classmates. But Asahi couldn't believe it. because she saw that the two had walked to school together under a single umbrella. And that proved their relationship wasn't ordinary. However, Mona immediately denied the dating rumors. But Asahi remained persistent with her opinion, making Mona feel powerless. Afterwards, when she went home with Kuroiwa, Mona recalled the whole incident earlier. She suspected that Asahi might have a crush on Kuroiwa. Mona feared that Asahi could be the one to obstruct the good relationship between her and Kuroiwa. So when Mona arrived in class, she asked Haruno about Asahi's information. Unexpectedly, Asahi was an extremely popular girl at school. It turned out she was a star of the soccer team. Even though Asahi was only a first-year student, she was also diligent and academically excellent. Indeed, Asahi was a perfect girl. But that made Mona feel worried. Because if a girl like Asahi secretly liked Kuroiwa, this would be a major challenge for Mona. Suddenly, someone came to class looking for Mona. It turned out that it was none other than Asahi. Since she hadn't finished talking this morning, Asahi now wanted to continue the conversation. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa happened to be there at the same time. So Mona wanted to go elsewhere to start the conversation. Unexpectedly, when Asahi saw Kuroiwa, she became a completely different girl. Asahi no longer had the arrogant attitude she had before. But now she became extremely shy. Asahi's face suddenly turned bright red. This made Mona certain of one thing. Asahi truly liked Kuroiwa. Afterwards, Asahi officially declared war on Mona. She was determined not to give up. The next day in class, Mona didn't expect that she would face someone with such an attitude. It was none other than Asahi. A little later, Kuroiwa arrived in class. He accidentally saw Asahi outside the door, and she was blushing shyly. At that moment, Mona ran over to intervene in their conversation. She couldn't afford to lose in front of Asahi. Luckily, class time began, so Kuroiwa successfully got through the awkward situation. Although Kuroiwa had just met Asahi not long ago, she had already left a strong impression on him, and this made Mona feel uneasy. Because in her current situation, Asahi was a major threat to their relationship. On Asahi's side, she was truly captivated by Kuroiwa because of his extremely cool appearance. But the reason Asahi could be so bold was thanks to Mona. Since Mona claimed she had no relationship with Kuroiwa, Asahi tried to find opportunities for herself. A little later, Mona had a PE class. At this moment, she was determined to erase Kuroiwa's first impressions of her by proving her basketball skills to him. But before that, it was Kuroiwa's turn. He seemed to struggle with basketball, and then accidentally fell onto the court. Next was Mona's turn. Unexpectedly, her skills surprised everyone. Mona even thought that this would be enough to impress Kuroiwa. Since Kuroiwa lost, he had to stay behind to clean up. Taking advantage of this, Mona decided to stay with Kuroiwa. Afterwards, Mona even taught Kuroiwa how to play basketball. But with this physical contact, Kuroiwa couldn't do anything. It felt as if a current was running through his body. It turned out this was exactly Mona's goal, and she had succeeded with her plans. Because Kuroiwa was extremely tense at this moment. Suddenly, Asahi appeared right then. She thought the one who liked Kuroiwa was Mona, but Mona quickly cut her off. However, Asahi seemed unwilling to give up, so the two had a physical contest. Kuroiwa stood outside, observing them. Afterwards, both of them felt embarrassed. They thought they had gone too far. The next day, Kuroiwa unexpectedly skipped school, causing his friends to worry. It turned out that yesterday, Kuroiwa had run home in the heavy rain without any protection. As a result, he caught a cold. At this moment, Kido wanted to visit Kuroiwa after class. Since Kuroiwa lived alone, Kido worried that he might face many difficulties. Unexpectedly, Asahi was also outside, eavesdropping on their conversation. A little later, Kido and Kobayakawa went to Kuroiwa's house together. While Mona stayed behind to observe them, she would act when she had the opportunity. However, Asahi had also followed behind. Because she had learned about Mona's plan, Mona was surprised after she found out the reason Asahi had come. It turned out Asahi had come to visit Kuroiwa. She was even seriously pursuing her own love, making Mona a bit hesitant due to Asahi's straightforwardness. Unexpectedly, they went together to see Kuroiwa. Even he was shocked by this extremely surprising event, since this was the first time a girl had come to Kuroiwa's house. He was completely stunned. Therefore, Kuroiwa wanted the two of them to leave. Unexpectedly, Mona measured his temperature with her forehead. Even Asahi was shocked. It turned out Mona had come to take care of Kuroiwa until he recovered. Afterwards, the two girls prepared food for Kuroiwa. This was their time to show off. but everyone wanted to show themselves. Forgetting that the sick person here was Kuroiwa, he was bombarded by the two girls, making it impossible for him to rest comfortably. So he just lay there helplessly without daring to speak. On the girl's side, Mona teased Asahi at that moment. Every time she met Kuroiwa, she felt extremely nervous, but that was indeed the case. So Asahi didn't know what to say. However, she would try her best. That was why she was someone Asahi truly liked, because she was flustered when asked sensitive questions. Asahi ran outside to buy some water. Unexpectedly, Asahi had fallen in love with Kuroiwa at first sight. Up to this point, Asahi didn't think she could be so proactive. Meanwhile, Mona at home kept staring intently at Kuroiwa. Suddenly, Kuroiwa jumped up at that moment. He accidentally fell into Mona. This made Mona freeze instantly. It turned out that Kuroiwa was dreaming at that moment. But after seeing his lips, Mona intended to kiss Kuroiwa on the lips. Coincidentally, it was also when Asahi had just returned home. She got angry at Mona for her earlier actions. At that very moment, Asahi realized that Mona was a liar. The truth was that Mona also had feelings for Kuroiwa, but she always denied it in front of Asahi. However, even Mona couldn't accept this. She still thought that what she did was intentional. Mona only wanted to prove that she had charm. Because Kuroiwa always acted cold toward Mona, it hurt Mona's pride. But unexpectedly, things had reached this point. The next morning, although Mona and Asahi were at school, they were still worried about Kuroiwa's health. Later, Kuroiwa's friends also came to class. They thought that Mona and Asahi were friends, because the two of them were together at that moment. This made Haruno there feel jealous as well. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa had come to class today. Since his health was gradually improving, Kuroiwa was also very grateful to everyone, because they had been concerned about his health. Suddenly, Asahi left right after that, just when she saw Kuroiwa. Meanwhile, Mona became flustered at that moment. Her face started to heat up, though she didn't know why. Then Kuroiwa wanted to say something to Mona, but she didn't have the courage to listen. So Mona changed the subject to something else, since Kuroiwa usually never talked to her. From that moment on, Mona always tried to avoid him. Suddenly, she fainted unexpectedly. Because Mona's health was having some problems, Mona was surprised when she woke up to find Kuroiwa beside her, taking care of her. A little later, after Kuroiwa's class, he panicked when Kobayakawa teased him, because Kobayakawa had set a sexy girl as his phone wallpaper. Kuroiwa wasn't used to such inappropriate images. He didn't even dare to look at it. Afterwards, Kuroiwa went outside. He was planning to delete those pictures from earlier, but there were too many people where Kuroiwa was standing, so he couldn't do anything. Unexpectedly, when Kuroiwa went up to the rooftop, Mona ran after him and called his name loudly. This made Kuroiwa panic and drop his phone. Surprisingly, Mona saw his phone wallpaper. However, she didn't react at all, and she left immediately afterward. At that moment, Kuroiwa realized something was wrong. Mona's piercing gaze kept staring at him. However, Mona knew it was just a joke from the boys, but she was surprised that Kuroiwa didn't feel uncomfortable about it. That was the reason Mona became upset. Afterwards, she heard Kuroiwa's friends joking that a guy's wallpaper should have pictures of beautiful girls. So Kobayakawa was preparing to send more pictures of other girls. However, Mona couldn't stand it, so she immediately took a picture of herself. Then Mona sent it to Kuroiwa's phone. As expected, Kuroiwa became extremely surprised. However, his next action was something Mona could never have expected. Kuroiwa decisively deleted the picture she had just sent. Even his friends were shocked. At that moment, Haruno came over holding a pumpkin. It turned out that Halloween was approaching, so Haruno wanted to see Mona in a costume. She wanted to organize this festival with everyone, which made everyone around very excited. Everyone was eager to sign up to participate. However, Kuroiwa was still hesitant at that moment, but he finally decided to join. By the weekend, Kuroiwa's group was standing on the street. It turned out they were waiting for Mona. At this moment, Kobayakawa was extremely eager. He wondered what Mona would look like in clothes other than her uniform. Then Haruno arrived at the meeting spot, and Mona showed up immediately after. Everyone was stunned by her beauty. Mona's appearance made others look up in admiration. Unexpectedly, one more person joined them. That was Asahi. Although she wasn't very interested in Halloween, she came because Kuroiwa was also there. So Asahi decided to come here. At that moment, she continued to feel flustered when she saw Kuroiwa. Suddenly, Haruno ran over to get to know Asahi. Unexpectedly, she was already a loyal fan. In fact, Haruno had been following Asahi for a long time. A little later, everyone went to the costume shop. They were amazed by how grand the place was. Unexpectedly, Haruno had prepared many cute outfits for Mona. Asahi was still struggling to choose her clothes. She didn't know what style Kuroiwa would like. Unexpectedly, Minami appeared at that moment. She was Asahi's close friend. It turned out Minami came because she knew Asahi had a hard time choosing a costume. And Minami was the one who encouraged Asahi to come here, because this could be a good opportunity for her to meet Kuroiwa. With the upcoming outfit Asahi would wear, Minami believed that Kuroiwa would be the one enchanted by Asahi's outstanding appearance. Afterwards, the girls took turns stepping out in their striking outfits. When it was Mona's turn, she surprised the others because Mona's costume was too sexy. Even Kuroiwa didn't dare look straight at her. Afterwards, Mona probably realized this as well. So at that moment, she became extremely embarrassed. Finally, the day of the festival arrived. Mona was determined to wear a really beautiful costume, so that she could become the person on Kuroiwa's phone wallpaper. Afterwards, the girls arrived at Kido's house. At that moment, his group had already put on their costumes. Only the girls hadn't yet, so they went to the room to change clothes. Asahi was curious about what costume Mona had chosen. It turned out that Mona had chosen to dress as a witch this time, because she knew that during the previous fitting, Kuroiwa had noticed this costume. Afterwards, everyone finished changing clothes. However, it seemed Mona was having a problem with her outfit, so she pulled a random person to help adjust it. Mona thought that person was Haruno, but unexpectedly, it was actually Kuroiwa. Since this time he was completely covered, no one knew it was Kuroiwa. A little later, Mona asked him to help adjust the outfit, but Kuroiwa was extremely nervous at that moment. Since he was a boy, Kuroiwa absolutely couldn't handle such a sensitive task. Nevertheless, he still tried his best to help finish adjusting it. However, Mona suspected something was strange, so she opened it to see exactly who it was inside. To her surprise, the person with her at that moment was Kuroiwa. This made Mona extremely embarrassed at that moment. But afterwards, everyone started having fun. However, after the incident that had just happened, Mona began thinking about everything in a negative way, and she kept staring at Kuroiwa. A little later, Kobayakawa organized a game for everyone. When it came time to pair up, Mona and Asahi competed for the chance to be on the same team as Kuroiwa. At that moment, the two of them suddenly fought fiercely. But since Mona was lucky this time, she got the spot. Afterwards, everyone began the competition between the couples. However, Kuroiwa still remembered the incident from earlier, so he was a little distracted at that moment. He didn't even know what he was doing. But because Mona really wanted to win, she always took the initiative in everything, even at that very moment. However, things weren't that simple for Kuroiwa. He couldn't resist Mona's temptation. That feeling was truly hard to describe for Kuroiwa, since he had never had a girlfriend before. After a while, Kuroiwa couldn't take it anymore. He had no choice but to give up the game. Then, when the match ended, the winning team this time was Haruno's group. Mona felt truly disappointed, because she couldn't execute the plan she had set earlier. As for Kuroiwa, other girls asked to take photos with him. The girls all crowded around Kuroiwa, making him so nervous that he was sweating profusely. Afterwards, Mona approached Kuroiwa to do the same. However, Kuroiwa unexpectedly refused to take a photo. This made Mona unable to believe it. She didn't expect to be rejected once again. But in the end, they did manage to take a photo together. However, it was a group photo with everyone, so Mona thought it didn't mean much. When she returned home, she felt extremely disappointed. The next morning at school, Kuroiwa was in an awkward situation. It turned out he realized refusing Mona yesterday was wrong. But because Kuroiwa had taken too many photos with other girls, he had no choice but to act that way. Perhaps from that moment, Mona was truly angry at Kuroiwa. Even Kobayakawa was upset on her behalf. Afterwards, they looked at the group photo from yesterday, and Kido noticed something was off between Mona and Kuroiwa. Perhaps Mona had been hurt a lot, so Kido gave Kuroiwa some advice. It would be best if he went to apologize to Mona, because Mona is someone who always cares and spends a lot of time with Kuroiwa, while he doesn't pay attention to anything at all. At that moment, Kuroiwa felt truly guilty. Just then, Mona appeared behind them. Kobayakawa thought this was the right time to act. However, Kuroiwa still wasn't ready, so he immediately ran off to another place. Meanwhile, Mona felt extremely uneasy inside. She knew that today Kuroiwa was trying to avoid her. Mona really didn't know what to do. Even in class, She kept thinking about it. When the class ended, today was also the day Kuroiwa and Mona were on duty. Unexpectedly, she accidentally spilled dirty water on Kuroiwa. This made Mona feel guilty, and she immediately apologized to Kuroiwa. However, even Kuroiwa apologized to her, making both of them freeze in this situation. After this incident, it seemed that both of them understood each other better, and Mona was truly happy about it. The next morning, Mona's close friend from Osaka had come to Tokyo today, so Mona was extremely excited, so that they could hang out together. As for Asahi at school, she was feeling down because of her current romantic situation, because nothing was progressing between her and Kuroiwa. In fact, Mona had the advantage, since she had the opportunity to be close to Kuroiwa. Suddenly, Kuroiwa unexpectedly appeared behind them. It turned out he had come to find Asahito return the wallet she had dropped. Taking this opportunity, Asahi's friend invited Kuroiwa. Minami's goal was to give them a chance to get closer. Even Asahi didn't expect that she would have a chance to be this close to Kuroiwa, especially since it was just the two of them. So Asahi's tension kept rising. She didn't even dare to look into Kuroiwa's eyes. At that moment, she couldn't speak a word. Her face turned bright red. At that point, she could only cover Kuroiwa's eyes. Afterwards, Asahi took a bold action. She kissed Kuroiwa on the cheek. However, Kuroiwa didn't know what had happened, because his eyes had been covered beforehand. As for Mona, she eagerly ran to meet her old close friend. And this friend of Mona's was named Tomo. She had an attractive appearance and was always noticed by other boys. Unexpectedly, Tomo really enjoyed this. Afterwards, the two of them chatted with each other. After being apart for a long time, Mona was curious about how Tomo had been lately. However, Tomo didn't reveal much. This time, Tomo noticed that Mona's meeting spot was very far from her school. It turned out Mona liked to keep things separate in life. She didn't want friends from her hometown and people at school to mix. Depending on the person, Mona would show a different side of herself. Afterwards, Tomo guessed that Mona would act cute at school. At that moment, she suddenly remembered things from the past. Back then, all the boys were crazy about Mona, so they always tried to impress her. Unexpectedly, Mona had rejected everything, but Tomo really wanted to experience that feeling. However, she was extremely surprised because Mona had never had a boyfriend before. Even though many boys had pursued her, it turned out Mona didn't understand much about romance. However, Tomo was certain that maybe Mona had someone she liked, which was why she had rejected so many people. But Mona immediately denied it. However, she then remembered images of Kuroiwa, and then Mona became shy by herself. She immediately blushed. Even Tomo noticed something unusual. Suddenly, Kuroiwa appeared from behind Mona. This made her freeze for a few seconds. It turned out that Kobayakawa's house was nearby, and Kuroiwa was buying food at the store at that moment, which was why he was there. Since Tomo saw that Kuroiwa was Mona's acquaintance, she pulled Kuroiwa to a chair to sit down. Afterwards, Tomo introduced herself to Kuroiwa, but he couldn't handle this feeling at all, partly because of Tomo's boldness, which made Kuroiwa even more uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Mona was staring at the two of them. At that moment, she tried to stop Tomo's playful teasing. Unexpectedly, Tomo glanced at a few expressions on Mona's face, and realized that their relationship was not ordinary. So Tomo confirmed with Mona at that moment, asking if Kuroiwa was her boyfriend. However, Mona immediately denied it, so Tomo had no choice but to take action, so that Mona could realize her own feelings. Afterwards, Tomo asked Kuroiwa to do some daring requests, which even Mona couldn't tolerate. She panicked and tried to save Kuroiwa. Because of Mona's actions just now, Tomo burst out laughing. A little later, their outing came to an end. Before Tomo returned to Osaka, she had something she wanted to say to Mona. Tomo knew that Kuroiwa was the person Mona liked. Although Mona kept denying it, she couldn't fool Tomo, because they had played together since they were little. Tomo had seen through everything. And then Tomo left immediately afterward. The next day at school, today a new student had just transferred into their class. Unexpectedly, it was Tomo. Of course, Mona was extremely surprised, because she thought Tomo was still in Osaka. It turned out Tomo had moved here due to her father's job. Afterwards, Mona felt annoyed, because Tomo hadn't said anything to her. However, Tomo just wanted to surprise Mona, and she succeeded with this plan. But Mona had a bad feeling. She was worried that Tomo would cause a lot of strange incidents while studying here. Afterwards, the two went up to the rooftop to talk. At that moment, Mona revealed to Tomo about how she had been doing lately in class. including matters regarding Kuroiwa. Therefore, Tomo understood everything. It turned out that only Kuroiwa wasn't interested in Mona, so she was determined to win Kuroiwa's heart. However, Mona didn't realize it. Clearly, she already had feelings for Kuroiwa, because even Tomo could see it. But perhaps Mona still hadn't accepted it, because she had never been in love before. At that moment, Tomo realized she had been too hasty. She had drawn conclusions too quickly. So Tomo pointed out Kuroiwa's flaws. That Kuroiwa truly had nothing worth liking. Suddenly, she interrupted Tomo. Although Kuroiwa seemed cold on the outside, he was actually very kind. Kuroiwa was always willing to help Mona whenever she had difficulties. And above all, he always said encouraging words. Mona thought that Kuroiwa was truly sincere. He really was a wonderful young man. Thus, Tomo's initial plan succeeded. She had acted as a catalyst for Mona to express her own thoughts. Of course, Tomo was now completely certain. Mona had truly fallen for Kuroiwa. And as long as Tomo was still here, she would help Mona realize this. Because this was the first love of Tomo's closest friend. But even Mona hadn't realized it. She still couldn't accept this truth. So afterwards, Tomo listed the signs to prove that Mona's feelings were real. However, Mona refused to cooperate with Tomo. But Tomo knew what Mona was thinking in her heart. At that moment, Asahi's group appeared behind Mona. And Tomo realized that they knew each other. So she approached and hugged everyone, which surprised Asahi. Although Tomo seemed welcoming, Asahi immediately refused, because she didn't like getting close to someone she had just met. Unexpectedly, Asahi's straightforwardness made Tomo like her even more. A little later, Asahi pulled Mona to another spot to talk. It turned out she came here to confess. A few days ago, Asahi had kissed Kuroiwa on the cheek. Afterwards, she had left, leaving Mona alone with a head full of thoughts. Suddenly, she felt extremely uneasy inside. Meanwhile, Tomo behind the door had observed everything. At that moment, she walked toward Mona. Suddenly, Tomo wanted to hold a welcome party. And she had an additional request, which was to also invite Asahi to come along. When Mona returned home, although it was already dark, she was still thinking about the conversation with Asahi that morning. Mona was imagining the relationship between them. However, she still wasn't sure about anything. Even so, Mona still felt very uneasy. The next morning, everyone gathered completely to go out and have fun. At the same time, they held a welcome party for Tomo, who had just moved. At that moment, both Asahi and Mona competed to greet Kuroiwa. But Asahi seemed to take the initiative. This made Tomo feel worried. Tomo had the feeling that Kuroiwa would be taken away by Asahi before Mona could realize her own feelings. Since this was Mona's first love, Tomo couldn't let it end like that. Afterwards, everyone went to the amusement park together. Since it was Kuroiwa's first time there, he was surprised by the sights. Meanwhile, Haruno was extremely excited. She felt as if she had returned to her childhood. In the meantime, Mona focused on Asahi, because she was afraid that Asahi was in attack mode. Meanwhile, Minami stared at Mona. Afterwards, everyone paired up to go on rides together. Unexpectedly, Asahi's group had planned ahead, so Asahi successfully got to go with Kuroiwa. Mona appeared disappointed, because Asahi now had the chance to be close to Kuroiwa. Luckily, Mona's closest friend began to act. Just as Tomo had planned, Kuroiwa would go with Mona on the second round. As for Kuroiwa, at that moment, Asahi accidentally touched his hand, because Asahi was very afraid of the super fast roller coaster. If she held Kuroiwa's hand, perhaps things would be more manageable. But Kuroiwa seemed flustered, because he was in contact with another girl again. Kuroiwa's heart suddenly raced uncontrollably. However, Asahi had been lying earlier. She admitted she wasn't actually afraid of these things, which surprised Kuroiwa at her words. Afterwards, it was Mona's turn. At that moment, she proactively asked Kuroiwa about his relationship with Asahi. However, Kuroiwa revealed that they were just friends. But it was Kuroiwa's answer that, unexpectedly. This made Mona breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, Kuroiwa also became curious about her. He wondered if Mona liked anyone. However, she didn't dare to answer that it was Kuroiwa. Afterwards, Kuroiwa seemed gloomy, because he thought he had made Mona upset by his earlier question. As for Mona, she was staring blankly. Tomo then realized something was wrong between them, so she looked for an opportunity to give Mona and Kuroiwa time to talk. That's why Tomo wanted both of them to go buy snacks for everyone. But on the way, no one said a word. Afterwards, they arrived at the snack shop. Unexpectedly, there was a promotion there. If they were a couple, they would receive a gift. So Mona immediately treated them as a couple. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa didn't refuse this. However, they had to prove it by kissing. This made both of them surprised. Kuroiwa was so scared that his whole body trembled. But then Mona proactively moved closer to Kuroiwa, because giving up would be of no use. At this moment, Kuroiwa became panicked, because this would be his first ever kiss. However, Mona suddenly stopped. She truly couldn't do this, even though Kuroiwa was ready. Unexpectedly, he felt a bit disappointed. Afterwards, Mona met with Tomo alone. At that moment, Tomo burst into laughter, because she remembered the past. Ever since they were in middle school, Mona had never been interested in romance. But she still went along with others about their ideal type, because Mona didn't want to be disliked by others. She even always wanted to receive a lot of attention from others. Moreover, Mona always cared too much about what others thought, so she kept hiding her true self. But in reality, Tomo-K knew that people would still like the real Mona more. And Tomo was extremely happy when she saw Mona acting naturally in front of Kuroiwa, without having to become someone else. Afterwards, Tomo encouraged Mona, telling her to truly understand her own heart, and to accept the truths that happened. A little later, everyone was on their way home. As for Mona, she was busy thinking. For the past few days, she thought Tomo was just joking, but it turned out Tomo truly cared about her. However, Mona still felt fear. She wasn't sure if she could remove her mask. Suddenly, Mona got lost, because she was preoccupied with her own thoughts. While she was about to text Tomo, Mona accidentally dropped her phone into the water. As a result, her phone was damaged. At that moment, she could only wait for everyone to come looking for her. As for Tomo's group, they realized that Mona had gone missing. So everyone split up to search. They quickly went to find Mona. Suddenly, Mona was harassed by two strangers. They brazenly touched her body. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa appeared from behind. Seeing this, Mona ran quickly toward him. The people with bad intentions then left. Luckily, Kuroiwa appeared at the right time, so he could stop the wrongdoers. However, Mona felt extremely nervous at that moment. But eventually, she thanked Kuroiwa for his actions. A little later, the two of them got separated from the group again. Kuroiwa tried to use his phone to contact others, but he dropped it into the water just like Mona. So both of their phones were now broken. No one could contact anyone else, so they had no choice but to walk around the area to look for everyone. On the way, Mona accidentally touched Kuroiwa's hand. This made both of them feel a little embarrassed, but they continued searching nonetheless. Mona was walking behind Kuroiwa, yet her mood was extremely nervous. By chance, Mona saw the Ferris wheel. She didn't hesitate to invite Kuroiwa to go with her, and Kuroiwa didn't refuse. As a result, they both went up together. However, in the cramped space, both of them were eerily silent. Mona herself was extremely nervous. She remembered Tomo's words, because when Mona was with Kuroiwa, she didn't hesitate to show her true self. But when Mona was with others, she always acted as the most perfect version of herself. Even Mona herself didn't know why. Suddenly, the Ferris wheel encountered a problem, so Mona ended up extremely close to Kuroiwa. This made both of them look very flustered. Mona felt as if she was falling in love. This made her increasingly embarrassed. Suddenly, at that moment, Kuroiwa revealed he felt that Mona sometimes acted a little strange. At times, Mona would pout and be annoyed about something, but then she would smile brightly as if nothing had happened. Truly, Kuroiwa could never understand Mona. However, for Kuroiwa, it wasn't a bad intention. Mona's strange actions were the reason that made Kuroiwa's heart race uncontrollably. It turned out that Mona's previous odd behavior was actually her way of being cute toward Kuroiwa. Unexpectedly, at that very moment, Kuroiwa expressed his feelings to a beautiful girl like Mona. After that, their conversation paused there, because Kuroiwa had found everyone else. Haruno breathed a sigh of relief when she saw Mona. However, Mona seemed tired, so she asked everyone for permission to go home first. The others could continue to eat naturally. However, Kido thought that wouldn't be a good idea, so Minami decided that it would be best if everyone went together another day. Thus, today's outing came to an end. Tomo was very grateful to have everyone go along. Afterwards, she and Mona went home together. At that moment, Mona felt guilty, because she felt responsible for spoiling everyone's fun. However, Tomo sensed that something was wrong with Mona. She realized that something might have happened with Kuroiwa. Unexpectedly, Mona became surprised. Truly, she couldn't hide her emotions. There was no reason for Mona to act so strangely. It turned out that Mona felt embarrassed because Kuroiwa had discovered her true self. Unexpectedly, Kuroiwa was behind them, and Tomo also knew about this. At that moment, Mona admitted to Tomo that she had really fallen for Kuroiwa. At that time, Tomo was truly overjoyed. Finally, Mona realized her own feelings. After a while, Mona tried to run after Asahi. It turned out that Mona did this to clarify one thing, that she had fallen for Kuroiwa. Afterwards, Mona immediately apologized because she had lied to Asahi all this time. However, Asahi had already known about this, because she could sense it, and that wasn't a bad thing. As long as one is honest with oneself, it's already very good, because love, according to Asahi, is something very difficult to express. No one can control it with reason. Mona didn't expect that Asahi would have such thoughts. And then Asahi went home afterward. The next morning, perhaps after so many unexpected events, Mona had started to fall ill. It was currently lunchtime, so Mona called Tomo to talk. Every time she got sick, she felt extremely lonely. Suddenly, Tomo saw Kuroiwa walking by, so she decided to hand the phone to Kuroiwa so Mona could see his face. At that moment, Mona became flustered, because her appearance looked a bit tired and weak. Mona was afraid she would ruin her image. But when Kuroiwa saw Mona, he immediately became surprised, because he saw Mona in her pajamas. And that distracted him. Now the two of them were facing each other. Since Tomo had gone to the restroom, they didn't know what to say and just stared at each other. However, when Kuroiwa became flustered, Mona found it very amusing. Afterwards, she asked Kuroiwa about things in class, and he felt comfortable enough to share. Because of that, the two of them were able to talk naturally. Mona didn't expect that talking with Kuroiwa would be so enjoyable. She imagined, if the two of them could go on a date, it would be wonderful. The next day, Mona returned, full of energy and vitality. She was very eager to go to school because she would have the chance to talk with Kuroiwa. Just that alone was enough to make Mona happy. She even wanted to do more things together. Afterwards, Mona went to school with a renewed energy, looking more enthusiastic than usual. Suddenly, Kuroiwa greeted Mona in the morning. Since it was the first time he had done so, Mona was extremely surprised. At that very moment, Mona saw how incredibly handsome Kuroiwa was, and she decided, no matter what, she would make Kuroiwa her boyfriend. That's it for today's video. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to support Oni-chan in the next videos. Thank you all for watching. Lots of love.